Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard User 924 coming at you with another video for you guys today. Since Independence Day is just around the corner, I figured would it be appropriate time for me to do a review on a particular Great American Bash pay-per-view. The Great American Bash happens to be one of WCW's biggest pay-per-view events of the year, alongside Super Brawl, Bash at the Beach, Halloween Havoc, and Starrcade. Now, the Great American Bash was a pay per view, even going back to the mid 80s, conceptualized by the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, who also on at the Great American Bash, which was the pay per view that introduced us to the concept of war games, which was a match stipulation consisting of two rings surrounded by a chain link fence, and you would have these two opposing teams in a 4-on-4 or a 5-on-5 bout. Even that WWE, once they purchased WCW, would also file trademark and even utilize their own pay per view for the Great American Bash from 2004 to 2009, the last pay per view that they did when it was just shortened to just simply the Bash. For this video, as far as the year that I'm going to be reviewing for the Great American Bash in this video for you guys today is from the year of 1996. Now, there were 9 matches that were featured on the card, including an infamous segment that would lay the groundwork for what would eventually turn out to be one of the biggest angles, not just in WCW, but in professional wrestling in general. And that segment I'll definitely get more into as the video rolls along. Now, the first match that opened up the show was a tag team bout between the Steiner brothers taking on Fire and Ice. Now, Fire and Ice was a tag team consisting of Scott Flash Norton and Ice Train, and those two wrestlers started off going at it one on one. And after a series of matches that those two wrestlers had, a lot of the times that ended in no contests. So this forces those two wrestlers to pair up and showcasing some sense of sportsmanship that leads to the formation of the said tag team. Now, Scott Steiner and Rick Steiner, we all know them as the Steiner brothers. They had been a mainstay in WCW throughout the late 80s, going in the early 90s. And they were just coming back in WCW earlier that year in the spring of 1996 after their short stint in Japan. And so they were just coming in hot. Yeah, it was a pretty decent opening match. There have been a lot better matches that opened up certain pay-per-views. But yeah, there were some moments where it did feel sloppy in some places. And, we did see a few double team moves from, Scott and Rick. I didn't really have an issue with the pacing of the match quality. The Steiners did, however, go over Fire and Ice, and Scott Steiner using the Frankensteiner to get the win for him and his brother. So, yeah, the match was a pretty decent way to open up the show. But there were some moments where the match did feel sloppy in some places, like Scott Steiner trying to do the T-bone to one of the opponents of Fire and Ice, and even the Frankensteiner at the end, which looked very sloppy, and it didn't really connect very well. The Steiner brothers did, however, go over in this bout, and Fire and Ice was a tag team that didn't necessarily last very long. I think after a couple months after this, like by the time you get to the fall of '96, like there was already showing dissension between Scott Norton and Ice Train, which leads to Norton turning on Ice Train, leading to a series of matches that they would have at Hog Wild and Fall Brawl, culminating in a submission match. But yeah, despite how cool of a name that tag team name was, unfortunately, those two wrestlers, as far as the tag team's concerned, that particular pairing did not last for very long. But as far as this match was concerned, I think this was a decent opener. The match pacing was fine, but there were some moments that kind of had you just kind of scratching your head as far as the constant botching of some of the moves that were executed in the match. Then we have is for the United States Championship, we have Conan going as the champion, defending the belt against El Gato. Now, El Gato, even despite the name, despite the character being portrayed as a luchador, is in fact actually Pat Tanaka, an Asian professional wrestler one half of the Orient Express back in the WWE. Conan was also coming in pretty hot during this time, coming hot from Mexico, and, he was the U.S. champion going into this pay-per-view. There was a couple rest holds here, but Conan had most of the offense. Now, Elgato, as far as that gimmick, it didn't necessarily last very long either. Pat Tanaka wasn't really memorable as far as his tenure in WCW, mostly wrestling on like Saturday Night and Worldwide and perhaps main event. Conan was, like I said, was coming in pretty hot. I believe this might have been around the time he was pursuing the AAA World Heavyweight title, or maybe just a little after this. But yeah, Conan was holding that U.S. title belt for quite some time. Conan does, however, go over El Gato with the Alabama Slam turned into a Jackknife Bridge to successfully retain the U.S. title. So it's just very interesting just to see, Conan, especially the first few months of him, especially in WCW, and how much of a push that he got initially. Conan would continue to hold that U.S. title until losing the belt to Ric Flair the following month at Bash at the Beach. Then we have his third match, which was Diamond Dallas Page taking on Marcus Alexander Bagwell. Now, Marcus Alexander Bagwell, a lot of people associate him more as Buff Bagwell, who would go on to have a reasonable success as a solo competitor as part of the NWO. But at the time that he was one half of the American Males alongside his partner Scotty Riggs. Now, Diamond Dallas Page, even during this time, he wasn't necessarily the star that he would eventually become a year later. So it's very interesting, especially in hindsight, just how over Diamond Dallas Page would become just the following Great American Bash just 1 year later, where he was main eventing the following year's Great American Bash against the Macho Man Randy Savage. So hindsight's like they say, it's 2020, but it's also very interesting just to see where DDP was at the stage of his career. And he was mostly, when he started off in his wrestling career, he had been a manager, and now he's trained to be a professional wrestler at this point. But I know this was around this time where DDP was just coming back. There was a storyline where if DDP lost, then he would be banished from WCW. And I believe he had a match against, I think it was like the Booty Man back at Uncensored 96, and he lost that match. So DDP disappeared for a few months, came back around the time of Slamboree in that Battle Bowl match to only win it to become the crowning Lord of the Ring. He feuds with Marcus Alexander Bagwell. And yeah, this match, I don't know. I mean, this match was pretty uneventful. There wasn't really anything too memorable. Now, they did a little bit of a coin toss between Bagwell and Riggs just to determine which one of the two American males was going to challenge DDP in a one-on-one bout. And obviously, it turned out to be Bagwell himself. But DDP did, however, go over Bagwell with the diamond cutter and to get the 3 count for him to win the match. And DDP was just still on the rise. Bagwell, at the time, being mostly a tag team specialist. I think around this time, he was just, throughout the first few years of his run in WCW, he would have these revolving door of tag team partners by his side, whether it be the Patriot or Too Cold Scorpio, or in this case with Scotty Rigg. And then a year later with Scott Norton with the short-lived Vicious and Delicious tag team. And Bagwell was kind of going through those stages at the phase of his career and wouldn't branch out into singles once he joined the NWO. So it's very interesting just to see these two wrestlers, especially where they were in their careers at this time, and especially with Diamond Dallas Page, since little would we realize at the time that the following year later that DDP would be headlining a pay-per-view, and just to show just what a year different makes for in this case with Diamond Dallas Page. Then we have is for the Cruiserweight Championship belt, Dean Malenko going as the champion, defending the belt against Rey Mysterio Jr. Now, Malenko and Rey had such amazing chemistry, especially during the mid to late 90s. And the Cruiserweight title was just getting launched during this time, and Malenko would be one of the I believe, either the first or one of the first wrestlers to hold the cruiserweight title. And Malenko would be the champion going into this pay per view to take on Rey Mysterio, who was also making his debut from Mexico and over here in the WCW at this time. So there was just a lot of great mix of mat based technical wrestling along with some of the fast paced, high flying acrobatics and Rey Mysterio. So there was just a nice blend of different wrestling styles between the two wrestlers. And that was one of the things I really admire about WCW, and just in terms of diversity of talent that they were rating it. It just really showcasing a lot of the art of lucha libre from south of the border over here in the States, and mixing in with some of the technical prowess that Malenko emphasizes on. So this was just a really good back and forth, and Rey Mysterio did a couple good spots here as well, especially with the somersault plancha on the D Malenko. Malenko did, however, finish off Rey using the power bomb from the top rope to successfully retain the cruiserweight title. So yeah, all in all, just a really good to great match, easily the best match of the night. Although there were also some other matches that were just as enjoyable as well, and it just would be the first of the many great cruiserweight matches that we will see throughout the course of WCW's popularity, especially going into '97 and '98. So some really great stuff around here, and just to show just how amazing chemistry that Malenko and Mysterio have. So definitely really enjoyed that match. Then we have is Big Bubba Rogers taking on John Tenta. Now, for those that don't know, Big Bubba Rogers obviously also wrestled in WWE as the Big Boss Man, and John Tenta, who also wrestled in WWE as Earthquake. So these two competitors are going at it, and they were actually part of the Dungeon of Doom, or at least in this case with John Tenta, who had at this point had already been kicked out of the stable, previously known as the Shark. There was a moment, I believe, on Nitro where Big Bubba Rogers was shaving John Tenta's hair, and they would have a series of matches, especially here at the Great American Bash and the following month at Bash at the Beach. But yeah, this initial encounter, I mean, this match was what you expect for a big man match. I mean, it's very unfortunate that these two wrestlers are no longer here with us. I mean, this match was what it was. I mean, it didn't last very long. And, John Tenta did, however, pick up a victory against Big Bubba Rogers. And this would also continue on a couple more weeks and leading into the next pay per view with the item on the pole match. But yeah, this match was what it was. John Tenta did, however, pick up the victory, so there you go at that. Then we have is a Falls Count Anywhere match between Chris Benoit taking on the Taskmaster, the leader of the Dungeon of Doom, Kevin Sullivan. Now, this was a very heated rivalry, and something that's already happened that they were already having in real life at this time. And yeah, this at the time that this Falls Count Anywhere match took place, it was something really ahead of its time. So Benoit at the time was part of the Four Horsemen, and woman happens to be one of the three valets representing the Four Horsemen, along with Miss Elizabeth and later on Deborah. This match was just so much back and forth, a lot of brawling, not just in the arena, but also, even backstage. We even see a brawl in the restrooms, and I mean, it was just very rare to see a lot of like backstage brawls going on, at least in WCW at the time. I mean, obviously there was a no blood policy, so they weren't necessarily allowed to show any wrestlers doing blade jobs whatsoever. I mean, this was very entertaining. You even see like a crowd of people in attendance also going backstage, also watching them wrestle backstage. So I thought that was some really cool stuff that they did. Benoit and Sullivan do, however, return to the arena, and there was actually a pretty cool spot where Benoit did a superplex from the table. Now, the table was not stacked, but basically kind of used it as extra elevation. I don't know how to put it exactly, but there was like a table that wasn't stacked that was lying on top of the turnbuckle, and Benoit happens to use that as a extra elevation for him to execute the superplex in order for him to beat Kevin Sullivan in this match. There would be better Falls Count Anywhere matches as the years rolled along, especially once we get to like the Attitude Era, especially when WWE was really going full steam with their um, hardcore based wrestling. At the time, it was just something very unique. Benoit did, however, go over Kevin Sullivan in the process. Then we have is Sting taking on Lord Steven Regal. Yes, that's right. That is actually William Regal in WCW. Now, at the time, he was a leader of a stable which was called the Blue Bloods. Now, it's very interesting to note that Sting was already slowly phasing out the blonde hair and started to sport the long, dark brown hair that he would have. So I kind of wonder, even watching like the last couple months of Sting as the surfer, as his under his surfer persona, I wonder if anyone knew exactly that Sting was going through the transformation, if they were intending on turning him into the Crow character with the black and white face paint, the long black hair that we've affiliated him ever since. So I kind of wonder exactly if they knew that Sting was kind of going through this metamorphosis during this time, because they did acknowledge that Sting was kind of going through a slight makeover in terms of his hairstyle, ditching the classic blonde hair that he was known for, and noticed like the last couple months of his run as the surfer gimmick. So I kind of wonder exactly if they knew that that Sting was gonna become the entirely new character, or this was kind of like planting the seeds for it. Yeah, this match was actually surprisingly really good. I mean, probably one of the best matches that William Regal's had, and probably one of the I was losing my train of thought here, but probably one of Steven Regal's biggest matches. Going on like a taking on a main eventer in Sting. So this was actually a nice treat. Just a lot of mat-based wrestling, hold for hold here and there. And the match was given plenty of time, and those plenty of times really worked wonders for those two. Sting did, however, go over Steven Regal with the Scorpion Deathlock in order for Sting to go over. One of the few hidden gems of this pay per view, and even with, as far as William Regal's wrestling career throughout the years. Then we have is a tag team match between Ric Flair and Arn Anderson taking on Kevin Green and Steve Mongo McMichael. Now, Steve McMichael at this time was serving as the commentator in for WCW Monday Night Show. So it was him, it was Bobby Heenan, it was Eric Bischoff. But at this point, this would be where Mongo steps down from his commentating duties and starts focusing more on a wrestling career, and as far as what's going to happen by the end of the match. But his partner Kevin Green, also a football player, they both worked in the NFL. Steve McMichael was playing for the Chicago Bears. Kevin Green was playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they would be teaming up to take on two members of the Horsemen with Arn Anderson and Ric Flair. And yeah, this actually was a surprisingly really great match, and it had every right to be. There's just a lot of storytelling involved in this match, so I think that really helped it. You had Kevin Green's wife. You also had Deborah, who at the time was Mongo's wife, and Miss Elizabeth, woman, and they were kind of going back and forth, representing their respective teams. This match was surprisingly really enjoyable, and it was actually given a lot of time. So I kind of wonder why this wasn't the main event. So Flair and Anderson would go over Kevin Green and Steve Mongo McMichael, when Mongo, however, turns on Kevin Green, and Deborah, who was escorted out of the match earlier, ends up coming back by using the briefcase that Deborah gave to Mongo and allowing Flair and Anderson to pick up the victory. Even though Mongo as part of the Four Horsemen was kind of a questionable idea in retrospect, but especially given even despite the pedigree that he has as a professional football player, so the fact that a professional football player would be representing one of the hottest stables of that time, so that was, I mean, it must have been quite a treat for Mongo, but as far as the idea of him being part of the Four Horsemen is kind of questionable. I mean, the match was still very enjoyable, so I can't really, I don't really have a lot of faults I have about it, but it surprised me. It definitely blew me away. And we also have a segment in between that match and the world title bout. And Eric Bischoff comes out there. He brings out the outsiders, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. They were just coming off hot from the WWF or WWE as we know it today. Scott Hall came out the the Memorial Day of 1996, cutting on a promo in regards to WCW, and when we see Scott Hall, it seems like he was declaring war against WCW and acting like he was an invader from another wrestling organization. And obviously, there was a bit of a lawsuit that was slapped with WCW in regards to this potential hostile takeover initially, thinking that WWF was actually going to invade WCW. So there was a bit of a lawsuit that was going on, and so they kind of had to kind of disclose it on the air, where they had Eric Bischoff asking if Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had ever worked for the WWE, and much to Hall and Nash completely denying all this. So Scott Hall just coming in Memorial Day '96. He's like, "You want a war? You're gonna get one," and just basically channeling his inner Razor Ramon character that he had already portrayed in the WWE. And we also have Big Daddy Cool Diesel also coming aboard as just simply Kevin Nash by his real alias. This segment basically serves a purpose as they agree to some sort of contract that would happen at Bash at the Beach, where this would be a six-man tag match between Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and a mystery partner taking on Lex Luger, Randy Savage, and Sting. So there was basically that building up into Bash at the Beach '96, and basically Hall and Nash end up attacking Bischoff, and Nash just power bombs Bischoff off the stage, and just creating this sort of drama, and just how despicable that Hall and Nash are, laying the groundwork for what would eventually evolve into one of the biggest angles in professional wrestling. If you look back at some of the older Nitros, and especially the first couple months of the NWO, I mean, it's just kind of very strange just to see, Bischoff, and, how he was actually WCW through and through. And then even despite all the times where he gets attacked by Hall and Nash, and then all of a sudden, like, he's joining them, or at least he's revealed to be the higher power behind the NWO. I mean, the segment definitely did its job and really setting up for what's going to be the main event, the special attraction for the next biggest WCW pay-per-view event after this, being Bash at the Beach '96. And basically, I did a review on that show, so you could feel free to check that out. Then we have is in our main event for the WCW World Title, the Giant going as the champion, taking on Lex Luger. Now, this match, I have to admit, didn't necessarily. This match didn't really do it well for me. I mean, it's definitely a step down from Flair and Anderson taking on McMichael and Kevin Green as far as that match is concerned. The Giant, he was coming as world champion. He had just um, won the belt from Ric Flair a couple months prior, and still representing the Dungeon of Doom. So he defends the belt against Lex Luger, who at the time was also the television champion and as well as one half of the tag team champions. So quite a accomplishment for Luger at this time. And imagine what would have happened if he would also hold the world title is also an interesting idea if they had gone with it. But obviously, Luger did not win this match. Basically, this match plays out basically a television style match that you would see on like Monday Nitro or Saturday Night. We do get some involvement from Jimmy Hart, who was the mouthpiece for the Dungeon of Doom. Sting also came out there to kind of even the odds. The Giant had to fend for himself, where Luger is trying to do everything as he can to wear down the Giant, and he even tried to like go out his way to torture rack the Giant but unfortunately that backfires. Giant keeps collapsing on him, and the same goes when Luger tried to go for a body slam. Like no matter how many times that he tries to do the unthinkable and lift the Giant, unfortunately, Giant just lands on top of him. Giant does, however, pick up Lex Luger, slams him with the choke slam for the 3 count in order for him to successfully retain the WCW World title. And that's basically the Great American Bash 96. And just a very enjoyable pay per view overall, and definitely really got as much accomplished, especially with the segment between Bischoff and the Outsiders and where that would lead going forward the following month for Bash at the Beach. Some really good to great matches with Sting versus Steven Regal, the Cruiserweight title bout between Malenko and Ray. The Falls Count Anywhere match, definitely also a big staple of this pay per view as well. Yeah, also the Flair and Anderson match with Kevin Green and Steve McMichael was also pretty top notch as well. Yeah, overall, just definitely a really enjoyable pay per view, and definitely would be a sign of things to come with WCW moving forward. Yeah, that's basically it for this particular video or review for that matter. Thank you all guys for watching. What were some of your favorite matches? And just leave down a comment in the comment section below. And till then, this is the Gold Standard Caesar 924 signing out.